All right, so I think we can go ahead and get started. It looks like we definitely have critical mass, so thank you all for tuning in today. In case any of you have not met me, I'm Megan Carney. I coordinate the Sustainability Fellows Program here at UNH, and on behalf of the Fellows Program and the Social Innovation Internship Program, we're so pleased to welcome you here today to the first in our series of alumni panel webinars. We're super excited about this series because we think it will provide really valuable insight into the whole field of sustainability for our current fellows and interns and kind of help them navigate their career options, which seems especially critical right now in these uncertain times. We're hopeful that these webinars will kind of give them a start to help them in the beginnings of mapping out their careers. We're also really looking forward to catching up with our alumni and partner organizations to hear about some of the great work that they're involved in. And we hope that we have some other alumni, it looks like we do, tuned in to reconnect with each other and with the newest members of our network, which would be this year's fellows and interns. So welcome to all of you and thank you for being here today. As I think most of you have heard, we've framed this year's webinar series around the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of you are familiar with these, but as a refresher, they were adopted 5 years ago as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. The SDGs recognize that ending poverty must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So that's the language straight from the UN. At the Sustainability Institute, the SDGs kind of provide a context, a framework, and inspiration for all of our work. So for this summer, we've selected a set of the Sustainable Development Goals that are particularly well aligned with the work that our alumni, our partners, and our current fellows and interns are all engaged in. So today we're going to focus on goal number 7, which is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. So I'm going to show a short video to kind of introduce the intent behind SDG number 7, and then we will dive into it.
Program Director for the Changemaker Collaborative, formerly the Center for Social Innovation Enterprise. And I oversee the Summer Social Innovation Interns. And so now let me introduce Dan Clapp. And Dan's going to be our moderator today, and he graduated from UNH with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Conservation. We're super excited to have him today. He's the co-founder of Revision Energy, which is a full-service renewable energy contracting company that provides a full range of engineering, design, installation, and equipment services for homes, businesses, and municipal buildings and nonprofits. And he's opened the New Hampshire branch in 2010 and has overseen the growth of Brentwood, Upper Valley, and North Andover, Mass. Offices. So we've been really honored to have Revision be longtime partners of the Center for Social Innovation Enterprise, as they've been host organizations for our social innovation interns and mentors for our students for a number of years now. And they've also sponsored a number of our programs as well, including our Social Venture Innovation Challenge. And Dan has been a just terrific partner for us. So Dan, thanks so much for, again, being willing to be here for us and coming out. And I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Faina, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm honored to moderate the first ever virtual alumni webinar series here. It's great. And yeah, as Faina mentioned, I graduated back in 2000. So it's been a little while. We did not have this great curriculum and, between the Sustainability Institute and the business school and the fellowships when I was back then. And so it's exciting to see how that has transformed over the years as well. But yeah, just I work with Revision Energy. We're local to New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. We're an employee-owned B Corp. So there's 265 of us across 3 states, and similar to that video, what we try to do is we try to, make sure that everybody has access to clean renewable energy. And we're talking about municipalities, businesses, and specifically nonprofits, because they don't have any tax liability. And I think one of the challenges that we need to look at is low to moderate income, and how do we get access to clean renewable energy for low to moderate income as well. So yeah, I'll just give a real high level view of the clean energy industry, the job opportunities, and we'll dive in with our panelists here. So stepping back, how do you define a clean energy job? What is a clean energy job? And it's a job that produces goods or provides services that can benefit the environment and conserve natural resources. I pulled that from the U.S. Energy and Employment Report. So looking at that report, it breaks clean energy jobs down into 5 categories. Clean fuels, we're talking biomass, ethanol, hydrogen, biodiesel, which employs a small number of jobs, around 1,000 jobs, according to that report. You also have clean power generation, which is a pretty large component. And that includes solar, which I work in, wind, hydro, et cetera. And that employs, in the zero emission generation, that employs over 500,000 people across the US, specifically around 250,000 in the solar industry, 115,000 jobs in the wind industry. We also have clean transmission, distribution, and storage as another market here, and that's mainly utilities, which employs around 417,000 across the U.S., and the construction industry working on our transmission and distribution systems, which is another 500,000 jobs. But that's around batteries, microgrids, grid modernization is where we see a lot of that potential or opportunity in. Another large sector is energy efficiency, that I'm sure all are familiar with. Most of those jobs, about 80%, are in the construction industry. So weatherization, materials, heating and cooling. But that is a key component in clean energy, reducing our overall load. And that's going to continue to be a key market in the years ahead. And then one of the exciting ones is alternative transportation, or motor vehicles. But we're talking EV, electric vehicles, not only on the personal level, but also, we're talking public fleets, buses, et cetera, moving more towards electric vehicles. And also what's exciting is V2G, vehicle to grid, with vehicles acting as a storage mechanism as well. But there's also a lot of construction opportunity there. I know we're focusing on a lot of DC fast chargers, and building out that network. But one thing I pulled out of this report is that 84% of all the employers that participated in this survey, reported that it's difficult hiring qualified workers. So there is an opportunity, going into this job market, to make sure that the qualifications align to have the opportunity here. And that's what we'll kind of touch on with our panelists today, is how they prepared for their job careers, et cetera. But in 2020, the growth ranged from anywhere from 1.7% in the clean fuels all the way up to 4.8% growth in the clean power electric generation. And obviously this was before the situation we find ourselves in now, COVID-19, a pandemic, in which has been forecasted to, have lost 17.5% of the clean energy jobs to date. So, I still think, obviously this is a short-term blip. We're looking over a longer horizon here, and there's still a tremendous amount of upside in the clean energy industry, in the job growth potential. I know, currently we have good support on the federal level to increase some of the, the investment tax credit, et cetera, to help jumpstart the industry back up again. So we'll see how that goes. But it's interesting parallel to follow is, you know, right now we're in a pandemic and it's been a tremendous hit to the economy. And it's, you know, and it's going to take a little bit longer than most have anticipated to come back out of this. But there's also another quiet thing happening that, you know, we don't see the immediate effects of, and that's climate change. And climate change is also going to have a tremendous impact on the overall economy if we don't address it. And so what's exciting about this industry is wherever you decide and choose to go, you know, you're going to have an immediate impact in you know, in solving the climate change issue and problem that we have, which is also invisible to all. So, you know, Revision Energy, we're excited, you know, for the growth in the future of, you know, microgrids, battery storage, electric vehicle, you know, electrifying the transportation section of our, you know, of the energy paradigm. So we see a lot of opportunity there. We call that beneficial electrification, where we're transitioning all of our energy load to the grid, right? And that's gonna add a tremendous amount of load, but through energy efficiency and distributed generation, we can offset that additional load back on the grid. So, you know, unlike the video there that we watched with energy poverty, you know, we have a very modern grid. You know, it's been around for 100 years. So what we got to figure out is how to transition, you know, distributed generation within our current grid infrastructure. And we got a great panelist on board that can probably touch on that as well. So, you know, with all this expected growth, you know, that we will see in this, you know, in the clean energy industry over the next 5-10 years. Of course, we're going to have a little bit of you know, this year will be a little tough with the current COVID situation we find ourselves in. But we're going to need multiple jobs in this industry for this to meet the need that we, you know, transition from fossil fuels more to an electrified, clean grid. And that includes, you know, marketing and sales professionals, IT professionals, financial and legal support, HR, trades, you know, electricians, project managers, you know, the list can go on and on, consultants, right? So who we have here today is, you know, is a 2016 Sustainability Fellow, Tom Calvert Rosenberger. He's a senior associate at Converge Strategies based in Washington, D.C. So we'll hear from him shortly. This will also require a lot of engineers working on this solution. So we have on our panelists another 2016 UNH Sustainability Fellow is Renata Hedgie, and she's an associate engineer at Con Edison, and she's based in New York. And we also will need a lot of analysts, whether you're a financial analyst, policy analyst, or a market analyst. And that's where Austin Perea comes in. And he is a 2012 social innovation intern and a senior analyst at Green Tech Media, specifically focused on distributed generation. So we're going to be here from them in a few minutes here, but it's definitely an impressive group of panelists. So I'm honored to bring them in for a discussion. But I think what you'll find in a common theme between all of our panelists here is that it starts with a passion for clean energy, a passion to make an impact in the social paradigm and change. And it's true what we find ourselves in today, not only with the pandemic, but what's going on with, you know, racial inequality, economic inequality. You know, we have, you know, the ability to impact that in a positive way by getting access to more, you know, more Americans, more business, more municipalities for clean distributed generation so they can own their power, so we can have a positive influence on that end. But another theme you'll probably find from our panelists today is, you know, it's never a straight line where you graduate school and you know, have a set career in mind. It's gonna take some turns. So you're gonna have to be open-minded, take advantage of opportunities that come to you in order to achieve where you need to go with your goals. So what they will spend some time discussing today is what they studied in school, their career trajectory, their process of getting their first job, challenges along the way, what opportunities they might see for young professionals. And obviously we need to hit on, what impacts we think COVID-19 will have in the weeks and months ahead. So we'll open it up. We'll give everybody 5 minutes or so to just tell a little bit about themselves, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And I think what we'll do through the Q&A is use the chat function. And I see that we already have some activity there. And then we'll just use some of your questions or open it up and have you ask the question, and we'll go from there. So I guess since I mentioned Tom first, we'll start with Tom. And yeah, it's all yours, Tom.
Sure, thanks, Dan. So I guess in my 5 minutes, I'll just give you an idea of what I do today and then how I got here. So as Dan mentioned, I am a senior associate at Converge Strategies. Converge is a small, we're 8 people as of last week. We're a small consulting firm that is in DC. We also have folks in Boston and Seattle. So where we're really focused, and I think you'll find that this is true largely of like the clean energy field in general, everybody's got kind of a niche. We are in the defense contracting space. So I'm a defense contractor for the most part. I also do some interesting work with climate change subnational groups and their communications professionals like on the side. But day to day, I work in a world where I don't get to say the words renewable energy or climate change or greenhouse gas emissions at all. And yet we try to help installation energy managers further and accelerate their energy projects at military bases around the US. And so what that looks like is us doing a lot of people connecting, helping people get connected to the folks that know policy here in Washington, DC, the technical experts, right, for advanced energy technologies around the nation. A lot of times people just don't even know what kinds of energy technologies they should be considering or using to enhance the resilience. All we do is talk about resilience now, to enhance the resilience of their military bases, right? So who has the latest storage technology that helps you with X? How do I pair my existing solar facility with storage? Should I be considering something besides a natural gas plant at my installation to provide power or to provide backup power? And how does that tie to the grid? And can I sell power back? And all of those questions is what we work on. So how I got here is interesting. I graduated from undergrad in 2012 from Texas Christian University in environmental science. And I started out doing some environmental education work for 2 years. I was teaching primarily children, but also adults, the fundamentals of science in outdoor settings. I'm still, by the way, very passionate about that. But after a couple years, I just felt like that wasn't paying the bills. And so I went back to grad school and went back to my home at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and did a dual master's in environmental science and public affairs. And it was during that time that I took this larger passion and really focused it in on energy economics. And during that time, I did my fellowship at UNH with the Sustainability Institute in 2016. And then interestingly enough, got my first job in DC because of another UNH fellow, Corey Johnson, who I think you will hear from in July. Corey's a great guy, and we still work together sometimes. But yeah, so anyway, I took the job in DC, and then I was working at Booz Allen Hamilton, very large contracting firm for the federal government. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a defense contractor. How did this happen? And then after a couple of years of that, I was felt a little bit too much like a pawn. So I moved into this world of startups and get to control my destiny day to day a little bit more, which I really appreciate. So that's the quick rundown on who I am, how I got here. I will just say, because I find that there's never enough time in these panels that if you'd like to connect with me afterwards, I'm happy to continue these conversations with any of you. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. And we'll jump to Renata.
Great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Megan and Fania, thank you so much for organizing this and for reaching out to me, because I'm always really excited about the possibility of engaging with current fellows and having these opportunities to pay it forward, because as I'm about to share, I've had a lot of help along the way too. So it's wonderful to have these webinars and these communities. So great initiative, thank you. So a little bit about where I'm at right now and then how I got here, similarly to how Tom shared with us. So I'm an associate engineer at Con Edison right now. Con Edison is the electric, gas, and steam distribution utility of New York City and Westchester County. So we don't produce renewable energy. We don't produce any sort of energy. Actually, we only transport and distribute energy to consumers locally. So I specifically work with distributed generation. So this is customers who are installing solar panels on their roof, or Whole Foods putting solar panels in their parking lot, an airport getting fuel cells for one of their terminals. Those are the sort of projects that I'm working on. I specifically study the interconnection of these technologies with specific projects with the New York electric grid. So it's a lot of technical work, but it's also more on the customer interaction side and the ever-changing policies and tariffs as it pertains to renewables, and particularly DG, distributed generation. So it's a really versatile and exciting space to be. And as it turns out, this is exactly where I wanted to be. So I'll now explain how I got here. So I went to Dartmouth College. I studied energy systems engineering. I came in just knowing that I was really passionate about environmental topics and discovered sustainability as a field in college. Really just pivoted to engineering in my second year, mostly because I felt that I was learning about all these major issues, but felt that I didn't really have a toolkit that I could use to start addressing some of the issues, and that's what drew me to engineering. But I still wasn't convinced, so I actually took a year off before my final year to try to do some internships in sustainability and energy particularly, and just try to see if I even wanted to be an engineer. And that's really where the UNH fellowship came in for me. I was also a 2016 UNH Sustainability Fellow. I was working for the UNH Energy Office. We were doing some feasibility studies of different fuels for heating of the campus. So I actually wound up doing a feasibility study for a biomass district heating plant, which actually miraculously got built. So the Thompson School on the UNH campus is currently heated by this sustainable biomass heating plant, which I originally did a feasibility study for. So it's been really exciting and rewarding. But my fellowship and working with the UNH energy manager, Adam Kohler, that's what really made me realize that I wanted to be an engineer. That's the way that I wanted to address these sustainability issues. And I moved into my next position at the New York Power Authority from that fellowship, very clearly because I did the work at UNH, I was able to get that next internship. Actually, at my interview at NYPA, the New York Power Authority, it was an energy efficiency internship, and one of the hiring managers actually said, just looking at my resume, like, wow, like you are already in the industry. You are doing exactly what we would like you to do here. Like, you're not even a student. And that would not have happened, of course, if not for the UNH fellowship opportunity. So clear transition there, one thing leading to another. And then I finished my undergraduate, my Bachelor of Engineering degree, and I used some of my connections that I made at the Power Authority to get a job at Con Edison. And at Con Edison, I didn't come in as an engineer. I actually came in as a management associate. Con Edison is one of these larger companies, as opposed to Tom, who has an 8-person company. I have a 15,000-person company. So it's one of these large companies that has a rotational management leadership training program. So it's an 18-month program where every 6 months you move around the company and get thrown into a completely different setting, completely new job. It's a wonderful way to learn not just the business and get a handle on the industry as a whole, but also to really interact with the infrastructure. So I know about the pipes and the wires, right? Like what's in the ground, what's overhead, how are we actually delivering energy to our customers, how are we providing that service, and building that knowledge, knowledge base, that skill set was super important for me going into my current position. And that's one of the things that I very much recommend if you have the opportunity to work for a company that has, how would I say, like has some assets that are not just people, where you're interacting with infrastructure in some way, even if it's not a sustainability position, it's super valuable because it gives you an insight into what is currently happening, what's going on, what has been going on for the past 100 years, what are the issues that we need to really address as far as sustainability. So I think I'm past my 5 minutes, so I'll wrap it up right there, and hopefully we can answer your questions and be as useful as possible to all of you.
Thank you, Renata. I
Great.
appreciate that. Austin.
Cool. Great. Yeah. So first of all, thanks to Megan and Vanna for doing this. I think similar to both Tom and Renata, very fondly look back at my experience at UNH and the Carseat Institute, as it was back when I was doing this, as kind of a pivotal moment in my own career development. So always very, very excited to give back and do things like this. So my current position is, as mentioned before, a senior research analyst at Wood Mackenzie. So I started initially at Green Tech Media, which if you guys are familiar with the clean energy industry at all, is like one of the top kind of editorial B2B journalist sites within that space. We had a research arm, and that actually got acquired by a much larger oil and gas research arm, research organization a few years ago, which has been, as you could kind of imagine, somewhat of a culture clash between a lot of kind of hippy-dippy people who are interested in sustainability and what have you versus kind of the oil and gas space. But in that capacity, I am a research analyst looking mostly at kind of how markets are designed and understanding the forecast deployments for distributed solar. So anything that's behind the meter, anything that's residential, that's for consumption by a customer is kind of what I'm forecasting. And the reality of this space, which I did not realize, I think, when I initially got into it, was that states vary quite significantly with respect to their energy policy. So I think when I was in school, I very much kind of focused on what was happening within national politics, but the intricacies of local political dynamics, not only from like zoning of projects, but also on a state level, how they're going to value that energy and what the incentives are behind it, how these programs actually, or how these projects actually get built, is very much a function of how states are determining how they're going to treat treat energy on a very local level. So I spent a lot of my time assessing policy, understanding, basically kind of teasing that and understanding how that will affect the long-term growth trajectory of solar. The way I got here was somewhat kind of a twisty and turny route. So I started at UNH back in 2009, did my undergrad there, and initially started as a political science major, and did that initially mostly focused on international relations, had a concentration in Middle Eastern studies in a very, very different path than where I kind of ended up, at least now. But I think that was instrumental in just kind of exposing me to a lot of the systemic economic injustices within the world. And I just had never had that type of exposure before. So I credit political science. That's always kind of the first discipline area that I felt like a true love for. But I think similar to kind of what Renata said, it didn't seem like there were a lot of super constructive ways, at least from my perspective, and not to criticize the political science department by any means, but it didn't seem like there were a lot of ways to address the issues that I saw, which were typically a function of like economic, environmental, or social inequity in some capacity. And so I ended up taking a class on microfinance, which I'm not sure, Michael Swack was the professor. I'm not sure if he's still at UNH, but that was the first time that I'd been exposed to the idea that you could kind of marry a business model, like a for-profit business model in the kind of financial and investment space, and actually see social and societal, social and kind of an economic gain from that for disenfranchised populations. So that was my first exposure to that, and he was associated with the Carseat Institute. I ended up I went to DC for a little bit and tried to do more of the Middle Eastern studies, national security space, and kind of quickly realized, although it was a great experience, I think it was something that just kind of made me realize that I didn't actually really want to do that, and was very much drawn back to this idea of social enterprise. And Michael sent me an email about the Carseat Social Innovation Internship, which I believe was in its second year at that point in 2012. Applied for that and got a job at Pax World Investment, which is actually, to Tom's point, I worked with Corey Johnston there for a little bit, so full circle with respect to the network here. But worked there for a little bit, and that totally changed my trajectory. I was looking at, I think we were both basically focused on sustainable investment. I was looking at compliance, OSHA compliance with industrial companies. And I think one of the pivotal points was I did a research presentation at the end of our internship, which I'm sure a lot of y'all will be doing here in a few months. And the folks at the Carseat Institute are fairly strategic about who they're inviting to these things. And one of the audience members was the person who ran Steve Saccone, who ran the investment group, the Atkins investment group at the business school. He was really impressed with that, kind of got me to come and present there and be a part of that. And that exposed me to the kind of broader world of investments. And so was focused in that, was a very super useful way to kind of get into sustainability, because it also exposed me to a very, say, establishment set of characters that were very finance heavy, who did not give a shit about sustainability or environmentalism, but did care about the kind of long-term economic impacts of ESG, right? So that kind of rolled into another opportunity to go to the Middle East and research Islamic banking and microfinance for a summer, which was crazy. There was a coup d'etat and I got evacuated from Egypt. It's a whole nother story. But all of those experiences combined, I think, helped me get my first job, which was not in any way related to those. It was actually at a consulting firm, Boss Consulting Group, where I was doing very kind of high level research. And in that position, I was not necessarily in the sustainability field, but tried to make a point, even at that early point in my career, to transition that as much as possible to a space where I could have the most impact. And I was lucky enough, and part of it was frankly luck, that I was able to focus on energy and infrastructure projects or energy and infrastructure research. And from that, got enough experience to apply to a little upstart called GTM, and that was about 5 years ago. So I applied for a solar research position there, and I've been there ever since. So I think I'm definitely over my time, but I'll give it over to Dan now.
Thank you to the three of you for giving some background there. I think I follow a similar path where, out of school, I spent some time out west and I was working in some health and safety and air quality permitting. but it wasn't until, I came back east where I really said, where's my passion? I enjoyed working my hands, energy. So I think, it's pretty consistent where you get out there, you expose yourself to new industries, to new challenges, new markets, and always have that end goal in mind, and take advantage of the opportunities at hand. But all three of you seem to really build relationships, leverage your opportunities, and continue to look for others until you found where you wanted to land. So, I mean, I guess just a bigger question is, what advice would you give everybody on this call who's coming out of college, even in this time, to first steps to take, or, how to go about really following their passion and finding where, their career trajectory. I guess I can start with Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So that question actually makes me think about when I was graduating from my master's program, and this was in December of 2016. And so, as you can imagine, like, very turbulent times to be graduating from a school of public policy. I remember distinctly our professors got us together in the auditorium, and like people were crying because they had planned on working at the EPA, and that like was not going to pan out for them now. There was a hiring freeze within the federal government, and it was scary. And it reminds me a little bit of today, actually, when it comes to getting a job. So I guess I would just say, I got my position by leaning hard on networks that I already had, networks like this one. I did not know Corey when I reached out to him. So reach out to people on LinkedIn if it says you have anything in common, even if you don't know them. I did not know that Corey had an incentive to refer me to Booz Allen when I applied, but he did. And so, like, you never know when people may want to refer you for things. So reach out to them for sure. And I would say play the people game, right? It's all about who you know, and apply for as many things as you can, but just make sure that you're using the people that want to help you.
Yeah. I second guess that, or sorry, not second guess. I second that. I think I think I was kind of lucky to do this, but I had a number of kind of internships and research experiences before I kind of landed my job. And frankly, my first job, kind of even at BCG, which is a well-respected company, does not really care a ton about its like research arm as much as its consulting arm. So even that experience was not like wasn't like my dream job. I wouldn't say I got my dream job until I started at GTM about 5 years ago. But I think it's just important to get as many internship experiences as you can, if only because, like, I think I mentioned earlier that the pivotal point for me was getting the Carseat social innovation internship, which is true in a lot of ways. It kind of set my trajectory. But the other thing was getting the experience in DC and realizing that I didn't want to be in like international relations and defense policy was maybe more influential in me in turning kind of my track. So I think just recognize that the utility of these internships is not just in like understanding what you appreciate and like in a job, but also what you don't like, which I feel like is not necessarily stressed as much because it's like slightly negative, but you can take that and be constructive about how you're approaching kind of what it is you want in a job, which, I mean, to be frank, like, you're going to be graduating and you're not necessarily going to have the full ability to get your dream job, and that's okay, but just recognize those things as you're going into it.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. And if you are still in school and it's not, haven't graduated, do consider taking a year off. Like, I know that can be scary sometimes. When I decided to take a year off, I definitely faced a lot of pushback, both from family, professors, friends, being like, what are you doing? Like, we're so close to being done, just finish, go on, get a job after. But I wasn't ready. And part of the reason I wasn't ready is because I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to head in, right? So if you're interested in sustainability, you're interested in clean energy, but those are massive, areas. So I didn't know if I wanted to work at an energy efficiency finance startup, or work at engineering consulting firm, or if I wanted to be at a higher education institution and work with students on sustainability initiatives. Like, I had too many ideas, and in the end, at the time, I didn't even consider that being at a utility, which just seems so boring and random to most people, would be where I would find the job that I'm most excited about and feel that I could have the greatest impact. So really taking that year off, and because while you're taking a year off, you're still technically a student, you have that student status, it's way easier to get internships and short-term learning opportunities, and to connect with people who are either alumni of the different groups you're a part of, or you know, somehow through other communities. It's easier to get those learnings than if you are now a graduate and you're looking for a job and it's like this massive thing weighing on you. So it's just my 2 cents. If you still can't have that opportunity, I highly recommend taking some time off.
I could not agree with that more. I think that's a fantastic idea. My little brother is actually, he's graduating high school right now, so it's kind of different. But I mean, I just think taking a year off in general, even separate from this conversation, is a great idea. But right now, given the circumstances of COVID-19 and this pandemic, that's going to lock us down for, maybe the next 6, 12, 18 months, like still very much anyone's guess. I think just try to use that year to your best. I mean, try to make as much of an asset as possible, and try other experiences and other opportunities. I will say there have been a lot of moments where I was just kind of interested. I saw a job, even like kind of in my existing job, and I saw another job, and I just wish I had more opportunities to, like, say, take 3 months to do a limited internship opportunity in another organization that I is doing work that I'm interested, but like otherwise have no business kind of being in, but that seems really instrumental. And you just don't want, once you get into a career trajectory and into a career field, you can still do it. You can still say, I'm going to take time off or take a sabbatical and go do this kind of random thing for a little bit and see if that, influences my career trajectory. But it's much harder to do. So especially given the circumstances, I can't support that enough. Just kind of taking a year off, if you're able to try to look at other internship opportunities and get a sense of what you actually really want to do.
Just to piggyback on Austin and Renata, I think you two may not know about this program that we have called Semester in the City, but it really is for students who want to kind of try out different career paths, to be able to go and do an internship for 15 weeks, so about 3 to 4 months, and stay on track to graduate. So getting 16 credits, a semester's worth of credits, while doing a full-time internship. So it's fairly new. It's about 3 years old. So UNH has partnered with this organization that allows students to not have to choose between, taking time off or kind of investigating what they do or never want to do again, but rather to try something out and stay on track to graduate. So just putting it out there for the undergrads that there is an option like that. But fully agree.
Thank you. We did get a question in from Henry, which is a great question, specific to utilities, and it's for Renata. I'll read it. Great to hear about the good work you were doing at Con Ed, integrating distributed generation. In my work with utilities, I find a lot of good minds spread around in various departments, efficiency, engineering, etc. But the best minds are not always empowered to be decision makers and policy makers. For example, implementing time of use rates for systematic innovation. Do you feel empowered to innovate in your job? And are you inspired to pursue a more of a policy role, or corporate leadership role at Con Ed?
Thank you for that question. That sounds like it's coming from somebody who's very familiar with how utilities work. So yes, indeed, I would say that being at a large company with 15,000 people, it's hard sometimes to break down those departmental silos, and to really work together on these initiatives that actually require quick resolution. Utilities for the past 50, 60 something years there really wasn't any innovation going on. Once we figured out how to trench and lay pipes and how to run wire and what size of transformers we needed, it's like, okay, now we're just kind of maintaining everything, making sure it all goes well. But now the whole paradigm is changing. So there is still a bit of that adjustment in my experience, where half the workforce is still in this mindset of, oh, but we are moving too fast. Like just 2 years ago, we were doing it differently. Like, no, but like yesterday, we need to be doing it something differently again. So I do run into that frustration sometimes, but I have to say that at Con Edison specifically, we have very strong leadership around clean energy initiatives. And there is, like, I'm in the engineering side, right? So I'm doing one of the technical stuff, but I definitely feel encouraged and empowered to innovate and to push process improvements or engage more with the policy side of the house. We work very closely in just my 2 years at the company. That's what I've seen. Yeah, so a lot of work left to be done. I know Con Ed is fairly ahead of a lot of other utilities, just being in the New York energy landscape, where we have pretty significant regulatory push from the state. The Reforming the Energy Vision is a statewide initiative to really push New York into a clean energy economy with really ambitious targets. So yeah, there's challenges, but I'd say Con Ed is doing the most, doing whatever we can.
As someone who's not in the energy space but does like a lot of observation of this, I will just say to people, like, when I graduated, I would never have thought about working for a utility. But to Renata's point here, like, the utilities are going to be ultimately responsible for implementing, from a technical perspective, so much of the renewable energy that's actually coming onto the grid. Con Ed very much like is at the very forefront of this because of some local policy initiatives specific to New York that require it to be so. But a lot of Northeast utilities and like California, where you're seeing an increasing amount of distributed generation, are really tackling some really, really interesting problems from a technical perspective, from a policy perspective. And I think that's where like a lot of change is actually happening. And I think the utilities don't really get a lot of credit for it because they have kind of an older model, but they are quickly innovating. And so for folks who are graduating, kids who are graduating here in a year or two, definitely be looking at what's happening in the utility space.
Yeah, I think utilities are key to driving this transition that we need. And a great example is Green Mountain Power, which is a B Corp up in Vermont. They're a great example. And, it actually makes me think of, a question I was going to have for Tom in regards to, another opportunity for somebody to lead in this field is the Department of Defense, which is one of the largest consumers of energy in the world. I think they consume around $20 billion a year. And I know Tom works with them directly. So I guess, Tom, the question is, why is it important for the DoD to set the example, to drive change around resiliency and the transition to clean energy?
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever looked at the federal budget. DoD takes up an enormous chunk. They're very well funded. So I think, Dan, it's a great question. And the answer is just that they're so large, the world's largest bureaucracy for sure. What we're seeing right now in DoD is really this emphasis on resilience, whereas under the last administration, there was a pretty explicit target on renewable energy. That is no longer the case. But it doesn't mean that the DoD is not being innovative. And we've seen a pretty clear history of technological innovations that flow from the Department of Defense actually out into the civilian sector, into markets several years later. That's not always a very efficient transfer of technology, but it does happen. And so right now, there is a lot of thought going into how do we increase the energy resilience of military installations, making sure that lights stay on in critical facilities, given that we are more likely to see impacts from climate change, right? And more intense and frequent impacts. So I don't know if you know what happened at Tyndall Air Force Base, essentially just wiped completely off the map in Florida And given that we expect to see more of those things, and we have facilities, like you can imagine, maybe like a missile defense facility cannot go offline. They can't have a power outage. So how do we take existing renewable energies and make sure that it meets those resilience objectives, so that when the larger grid goes out, so that, you know, the power line gets hit by a tree outside the base, that we still have lights on inside the base. Anyway, I think that these are technologies that if we look to a larger energy transition across the US, where we see a radically distributed and decentralized grid, that these are technologies that will and should exist outside of the DoD as well. So getting them tested in kind of a defense space first, where there is a lot of funding, is important and I think reasonable.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's exactly what I was looking. It does drive a lot of the technology that we use in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a, Megan and Fana, just check, do we have a stop at, what time is our stop? Just so I know.
Technically at 2.
Okay.
For what it's worth, I can stay longer. I'm not sure if other folks have things, but I can, I mean, you're.
Yeah. A question came in to all panelists. So someone feel free to jump on this one. How do different forms of consulting vary in day-to-day projects and tasks? GTM, engineering, converge strategies, etc.
Okay, so started at a very large consulting firm. Booz Allen is like over 20,000. It depends on the type of consulting. Okay, so I would just look at, you know, who are their main clients, right? You could be doing anything from engineering support all the way to like, please build me a slide deck for these super important people. You know, like it's all over the place. Consulting means nothing and everything at the same time. So I think it's just very important whenever you are applying for those positions. If they're incredibly general, it's probably because you're being hired to be on the bench. So they're going to hire you into a large consulting firm. They don't have a project in mind for you yet, and then they're going to stick you wherever is convenient. But then there are also positions where they're hiring for a very specific project. And so as you're in an interview process or as you're moving into those spots, be specific in your questions, right? Like, who is the client that I would be working for? What would my day-to-day tasks look like? Am I going to be at a computer all day? Am I expected to travel, you know, to and from multiple sites? Because all of consulting can look very different. I think another thing wrapped up in your question is, what kind of control do I have over my day-to-day activities? And I will just say, in my personal experience with smaller firms, you are going to have more of that leverage and influence, leverage, consulting words. You'll have more influence over the direction that you would like to travel in your career at a smaller firm, just because you have less red tape to get through as you talk to your bosses. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree with all that. On the research side, at least at GTM, the consulting that we do is pretty limited to like applied research consulting, which I'm not sure if that's what the question intended to discuss. But at any rate, I mean, we'll at least for market research, you're looking at taking like a very specific question that maybe our existing research doesn't answer and diving deeper into that. So that can mean maybe a company wants to like invest in, which has happened before, a company wants to invest in a portfolio of projects on the Northeast, like in the Northeast, and wants to know what the expected kind of value of those projects are. So you're doing a fair bit of data analysis, right, with whatever they have on those project level economics, in addition to understanding kind of what the long-term cash flow risk is based on what our understanding of policy is, right? So it's like those things are kind of, to Tom's point, it can be like very specific, and we're taking kind of information that we have a foundation of and then applying that in more of like a research capacity. So at least in my current position, we're not doing anything on the management consulting side, I think, which is kind of what Tom was talking about, but yeah.
So I would love to jump in and kind of officially close this out. And if people are able to and want to hang out for just a few minutes afterwards, that's cool. But anybody who needs to go should be able to go. So I just want to say thank you so much to Dan and Tom and Renata and Austin for sharing your stories with us today. I know like it was super inspiring for me, and I'm sure really useful to all of the students for their work this summer, and especially looking beyond the summer in terms of their career paths. I want to encourage you all to stay in touch with us and to stay in touch with each other. LinkedIn is a great place to start. So please all go connect with each other via LinkedIn. And we do have another webinar next week focused on community development. So please join us for that. And if you have to go for now, please do. If you want to hang out for a minute, that's great. That includes you panelists. So anybody who has to peel off, please do. But thank you so much. And we will see you all next week.
Thanks
Thank you,
so
Meg.
much, everyone. Thanks
Yeah.
to the panelists.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I do have to drop off actually, but thank you very much. And feel free to reach out to me, email, LinkedIn, anything's fine. I'm more than happy to answer any more questions if I can. Thanks again.
Thanks,
and,
Renata.
Thanks,
Thank you, Renata.
And I'll throw that out there as well. Feel free to connect with me over LinkedIn. My email is dclapp@revisionenergy.com. I live local. I'm in Madbury, New Hampshire. So if anybody's in New Hampshire, feel free to reach out. But
Don't come too close.
Yeah. 6 feet away.
Thanks
Yeah.
so much, Dan.
Thank you, Fana. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Austin.
You bet, Dan.
Absolutely. Bye, Dan.
Bye.
Dan.
So I can stay on until about 2:15 Eastern. So happy to chat if folks have questions.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, Sam, I can stay on for.
I mean, I guess Megan, it's up to you're the it's your Zoom, right? Like, do you have to?
Yeah, no, I'm cool to stay on. I don't want you to, any of you to feel pressure to stay on, but
Okay.
if you're,
I can stay on for another 10-15 minutes too. I was just saying bye to everybody.
yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So if you're a student and you're still on and you have a question, go ahead and fire away. It sounds like we have a few more minutes with these guys. And I don't know if Dan, you were getting any questions that they were funneling directly to you or no.
No.
No. Okay.
No. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat.
Okay.
I'd be interested to know. So it looks like you all are in kind of different places in terms of like where, you know, when you're jumping into a career next. But what are types of things that you're thinking about or that you think you might like to be doing in the next couple of years?
Megan, you have to call people out.
There we go.
I can share if that's helpful. So I'm Gabe Desmond. I'm a one more semester at Middlebury College up in Vermont, and I'm out in Washington State right now with my parents, doing everything that's going on. And I'm really interested in like clean energy policy, climate change policy from especially at like the state level. I think I have some experience working in the federal level, and just like things go really slowly, and you know, I have colleagues who spent years and they get one line in the Farm Bill, and that's their big success after 2 years of work. And I'm more interested in having bigger impact on a smaller scale. So that's something that I'm interested in exploring. I don't know specifically how that might relate for like YouTube, but
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I think, as I think I mentioned earlier on in the discussion, like I feel like when I was an undergrad, I only thought about federal policy. But I'm not sure if folks read like Obama's letter to the country on Medium like a few days ago, but he said something about how a lot of racial and like justice kind of issues are focused on the local level. In general, I think people should care more about what's happening with local politics. Like there's just nothing. The turnout for local elections is abysmal. But that also extends to renewable energy policy. So there are increasing opportunities for that. So I think what I would urge you to look at, and I can, if you want to follow up after, I'm happy to give you some list of recommendations, but there are a ton of local and frankly federal organizations that are kind of distributed across the country that are focusing on these issues. But these like increasingly state level policy is just like, it's not going to go away. I remember when I started this job, this current job 5 years ago, and it was pretty easy in like a single quarter. We do quarterly reports that we publish, and I remember it being pretty easy to comprehensively look at what has happened in the past quarter from a state level policy perspective and put it all into the report. Nowadays, I'm like, great if I can scratch like 10 to 15% of that, like because there's just so much that's happening, because as the DG onslaught continues, more states are thinking proactively about how to either modernize their grid, value these credits, or also from a larger perspective, set 100% renewables targets. And that was something that I think even a few years ago was not something, I think only like 2 states had done it. California and Hawaii. And since 2018, the midterm elections, there are, I want to say, probably close to 10 or 11 states now that have in law 100% renewable energy targets. And each state is going to be very different with respect to how they're actually implementing that, because of the realities of their own grid, and because of the internal political dynamics of that state. So very much encourage you to look at some of the organizations that are doing that. SIA is one of those. IREC, well, just reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to provide a list of some of the organizations that are doing that. But a place where we need people, and we also need someone who, we also need people who are socially justice oriented, because I don't want to get too much into this, but there are huge issues of socioeconomic and racial inequality within who is actually benefiting from distributed generation, and those voices kind of need to be heard. So yeah, happy to follow up later with some list of recs in that space, but definitely a growing area, and not anything that's going away.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would second that. I would say also check out US Climate Alliance. I think they're doing a lot in this space. Austin, I'm pretty sure that the number I heard this morning is there are 15 states now.
Really?
Like Virginia was the last to join. So
there are states that have like signed legislation, and then there are governors who have like outlined an executive order. 100%, but it could be 15. Like it's increased in crazy magnitudes just since.
Yeah. And then I was also going to say, Gabe, I think one of the areas that we work in a little bit, and I think is very interesting right now, if you're interested in state policy, is you should check out the building electrification space, because there's only a couple states, and really only a couple municipalities within those states, California, leading on this charge to get buildings electrified, to make sure that we're not using natural gas in our buildings. And then the biggest challenge is like, how do you get natural gas infrastructure out of buildings after it's already built in? It's a crazy challenge, and the patchwork across the US, I mean, is mostly states have not even begun to consider this, but as we see like California, Colorado, Washington, New York beginning to implement policies, and they're very difficult. I think that there's going to need to be greater coordination between governors and states on how we implement this going forward, because there's not likely, even with the change of administration, to be any sort of building electrification guidance from the federal level. So if it's interesting to you, I think it's very exciting at the moment.
Yeah,
like
thank you.
Getting it on the ground level. Yeah.
You know, I'd also look at, you know, specific states, and look at open or current PUC dockets to see who the interveners are, to see who's really active in the state policy. So specific to New Hampshire, you know, Henry had to drop off, but we have Clean Energy New Hampshire. That would be a great group. Henry Herndon, who's also an alumnus, would be a great person to contact on that end, Gabe. You can just reach out to me and I can connect you guys if you don't know.
Great, yeah.
And also working, I mean, we mentioned a lot of the organizations that are working from a nonprofit perspective and are interveners in this, but the utility agencies, the regulatory agencies themselves are also doing good work in this, right? So departments of, I guess in Massachusetts, Department of Public Utilities, but basically your public service commissions their staff are doing the necessary regulatory work to put in place tariffs. There's a lot of good regulatory policy work there. And the incentive agencies are also helping increasingly in this. So Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, NYSERDA in New York, those are, you know, kind of 2 examples that are very large organizations that are working on this as well. So definitely don't forget the regulatory side of this from a state level.
As a business owner, it happens at the state level. We are focused on, every state we work in.
For sure.
All right, I feel like we probably should wrap because we've already taken an extra 10 minutes from all of you. Totally appreciate you being here and doing this in the first place and then staying for an extra 10 minutes. I'm sure you'll get some follow-up pings, and so in advance, we appreciate your response to those as well. It was really great to hear all your stories and to just catch up and be in touch. So I'm gonna let everybody go, and we hope to talk to you all again soon.
Sure.
Thank you, guys.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.